Julia squirmed, conscious of sweat between her breasts and under her arms. Between the heat and the curious eyes of her sisters, she felt physically and mentally stifled. Valerie could be bleeding to death, and here she sat with these pampered princesses as if nothing had happened. And what of Adrian and the other protesters? What kind of treatments would they be receiving alone in the hands of the police? There was a $100 bill stashed in her suitcase back at the door. In case of an emergency, her mom had said. It might be enough money for bail, and she couldn't think of a more justified use. So without a word of explanation, she clambered down the rickety metal bleachers. "Julia, where are you going?" Student President Lydia demanded in her haughty voice. But Julia didn't answer. As soon as she was out of sight of her baby sister, she started to run. She'd explain her abrupt departure later. Right now, she had to help out and aid. Flushed with exertion and triumph at her own resourcefulness, Julia rushed into the reception area at the Hampton police station a few minutes later. Thrusting her money at a skinny young cop sitting with his feet on the desk, she announced, "My friend Valerie, sir. Here's $100 bail money for her and the others." The policeman swung slowly around on his chair. He leaned forward to examine Julia. His gaze traveled up and down her body, stopping at her skirt, which rose 6 inches above her knees. "You mean the hippie?" he drawled, not removing his eyes from Julia's well-shaped legs. "Now what's a nice girl like you doing with the likes of that?" A blush crept upward from the flat collar of her dress, deepening the pink already on her cheeks. "I have cash," she snapped, resenting his insinuating look. "You take cash, don't you?" "Sure we do." As he smirked at her, she noticed his face was narrow like a fox with small, mean eyes. "But we haven't set bail yet. Could be anywhere from $50 to $1,000 per head." "But that's not fair. These people haven't broken the law." "Ah, but they have, they know, you Blossom. Refusing to stand for our national anthem is an offense. And Judge Wilkins went fishing this weekend, so it's up to me and Sheriff Mitchell to make the determination." Belligerence was getting him nowhere, so she tried to appeal to his sense of humanity. He was supposed to watch out for the public good, after all. Please give them a break," she pleaded. "Valerie may be seriously injured. She needs a doctor." Glancing around, the cop licked his dry, cracked lips and quietly suggested, "Then come in back with me, Magnolia Blossom. Give me some of that free love, and maybe we can negotiate." How dare he speak to her that way, as if she were a slut and not a member of the most respected sorority on campus. Who did he think he was? Tears of rage welled into her eyes. You owe me an apology," she cried. "Now take my money and release my friends." She nearly shoved the $100 bill into his face. "Trying to bribe an officer of the law, eh?" he snarled, plucking the money from her. "Here's my evidence. You're under arrest for solicitation." He seized her arm. The harder Julia struggled to break free, the firmer his grasp became. "You can't do this," she barely noticed the tears spilling down her cheeks. She could smell the chewing tobacco on his breath. "Go ahead and fight me, flower child. I can add the charge for resisting arrest to your record. That'll explain the bruises on your pretty body after I pay a visit to your cell later." Now Julia was really scared. Until tonight, she never even talked to a policeman, and now she was about to be raped by one. And she barely let the boy she dated touch her. A door slammed open. They both jumped. Julia buried her face in her free elbow so no one could see her mortification. "Excuse me, officer," a clear male voice spoke. "But my friend and I couldn't help listening in on your conversation as we approached the station. I'm sure you're aware that sexual harassment, either male or female suspects, is a violation of Section 201.4 of the Hampton Village Police Code and can result in immediate dismissal. Immediately, and incidentally, just how was this young lady breaking the law?" Releasing his grip, the cop backed away. Julia peeked through her fingers and glimpsed a sturdy young man, a medium height, a few years older than she. He had a pleasant, open face and could have been mistaken for a professor, save for his faded frayed bell-bottoms, and frizzy tan hair tied back in ponytail. Tilting his head so his eyes met hers, he smiled at her as though the situation were just another minor inconvenience of everyday life. Julia wanted to run and hide behind him, but restrained herself. She straightened up, trying to maintain her few remaining shreds of tattered dignity. The young man said to the cop, I'm Louis Wexler, president of the Student Mobilization to End the War Committee to End the War in Vietnam. It's my understanding that you have some of our people in custody, specifically Adrian Shackley, Valerie Stasek, Sean Collier, Stu Masecco, and Laura Sturgeman. I'm here to discuss the nature and constitutionality of their internment. Julia remembered Valerie and Adrian talking about Louis Wexler. He was supposedly brilliant with plans of becoming a lawyer. He'd been a medic in Vietnam, and as a result of that experience, was totally committed to stopping the war. Julia had never met a Vietnam veteran before. Military service was not a part of her or her friends' lives. The policeman was obviously intimidated by Louis, for he kept edging towards the back of the room while Louis spoke. Yeah, right, he mumbled. We got him in the holding cell. I'll get Sheriff Mitchell. I'm just the deputy. Then he disappeared. Louis turned to Julia, his pleasant mask replaced by a look of anger. You should press charges. Sexual harassment is heavy stuff, and it would serve that bastard right. I don't want any more trouble. Now that she was safe, Julia began to shake violently. She tried to conceal her emotions by fumbling in her purse for a tissue and wiping off her remaining mascara and eyeshadow. But thank you so much for rescuing me. What were you trying to do anyway, he asked. I'm here to bail out Valerie and Adrian, too. For the first time, she glanced at Louis' companion, a tall, muscular fellow. He leaned against the door, his face mostly hidden by a purple felt hat. Louis raised his eyebrows. Was he still studying her sorority pin or her breasts? That probably won't be necessary. He sounded amused. Valerie, Adrian, and the others were ushered in. They seemed fine, albeit somewhat disconcerted. Julia saw with relief that Valerie only had a cut on her cheek, which she nursed with an ice pack. But Julia recognized the burly policeman who accompanied them. This man assaulted Valerie for no reason, she cried, pointing to a piece of gauze wrapped around his right hand. He even hurt himself hitting her. The man, obviously Sheriff Mitchell, cast a disgusted glance in Julia's direction. You kids have all the answers, don't you? You think you know everything. Quickly unwinding the dressing, he revealed bloody, deep indentations on his hand, the obvious marks of human teeth. Everyone gasped, and Julia felt her stomach rise to her throat. Even Louis turned away. Your friend bit me, Mitchell continued, covering up his wound. But because she was resisting arrest, I tried to handcuff her. I struck her in self-defense. So the flash of steel had been handcuffed, not an iron knuckle. And Valerie hadn't been the totally helpless victim after all. With dismay, Julia realized she jeopardized both her personal safety and position in the sorority for a situation she hadn't fully understood. You mean I went to all this trouble, she began, and was stopped by the gentle pressure of Louis' fingers on the small of her back. Officer Mitchell, may I speak honestly? Louis didn't wait for an answer to his rhetorical question. We appear to have a Mexican standoff of sorts. You've arrested 3 out of 5 of my people on unconstitutional grounds. Only Stu Masecco and Laura Sturgeman were wearing the American flag in what you might consider an inappropriate manner. Although you could press charges against Valerie Stasek for resisting arrest, the reason behind her internment might not hold up in court. Valerie hung her head as if ashamed, and Julia recalled her praising Mahatma Gandhi and his methods of nonviolent protest. But Randall Winfield and I caught your deputy, Louis' well-modulated voice turned to steel, making sexually threatening actions towards. He looked at Julia as she softly supplied Julia Brandon, which is a hell of a lot more serious than a bunch of college kids demonstrating against Vietnam during a university-sponsored function. Sheriff Mitchell sighed, settling his heavy bulk at the desk, so recently vacated by his wayward deputy. Look, son, I don't really want to tangle with you or your organization, but the university is worried about trouble on campuses these days and gave us specific instructions to halt any unauthorized protests. He rubbed his tired-looking face. Believe it or not, I'm not totally unsympathetic to your cause. The way you go about things maybe, but I'm not sure I'd want to fight in that jungle war myself. Why don't you try working within the system? It's impossible, and you know it, Valerie retorted, pressing the ice pack against her injured cheek. Look, I'm sorry I freaked out and bit you, but getting the word out to the kids is the only way we're going to accomplish anything. The administration refuses to recognize student mobilization and won't grant us the right to assemble. We could argue politics for hours, said Louis, but the facts are we have an even trade. Drop the charges against these 5 people, and will overlook the incident of sexual harassment. Julia shot Louis an alarmed glance. She hardly wanted to testify in court, but Louis reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. "You've got to understand about Deputy Adams," Sheriff Mitchell said. "He lost his brother in Nam 6 months ago. So contact with your friend Julia here, or anyone against the war, is like waving a Viet Cong flag in his face. We even leave him at the station whenever we go on campus patrol." He shook his head, a middle-aged man overwhelmed by society gone awry. "When Ike was president, everything made sense. Now all of you get out of here." Louis and the girl named Sean went with Louis' friend Randall to get their car, which was parked in an alley across from the street. The rest restrained their whoops of joy until they were 50 yards away from the police station. Stu hugged Laura and cried, "Far out, I was afraid we'd have to get married in the jail cell." Adrian bent over from his height of 6'1" and kissed Julia on the cheek. "Oh, wow, I can't believe you actually came to bail us out. Won't your sisters have a shit fit?" Valerie turned to Julia, her eyes deep pools of apology. "I'm so sorry I created this hassle for you, Julia. I had no idea that you'd go to such lengths for me. Even though you're a story chick, you're a real human being." "Thanks a lot. In spite of everything," Julia had to chuckle. "Did that young kid hurt you?" Valerie asked. With your look, sweet and innocent Julia, you need to take karate." Holding on to her injured face, Valerie did a fractured kung fu imitation of golden hair flying. "Hi-ya, Kiki in the balls," she said. Julia released her tension over the incident with hysterical laughter at Valerie's theatrics, but she stopped when she remembered the $100 bill. "That deputy took my money and he never gave it back." "You didn't ask for a return of the bail?" Valerie demanded. "So much was happening I forgot." Once again, Julia was near tears. "How will I tell my parents? What will I tell my parents?" She hadn't thought of how Dr. and Mrs. Harry Brandon would react during her impulsive flight to help Valerie and Adrian. "Say someone ripped you off," Adrian suggested. "Besides, who cares what the old fogies think anyway?" "That pisses me off," Valerie scowled. "I'm going back there and insist that deputy asshole return your bread." She began to walk back to the station. Julia grabbed her arm. "Don't, Valerie. It's my money and we've had enough for one day. I'll explain I lost it. In a sense, it's the truth." Although her father would be annoyed, she would never frighten her mother by telling her the whole story. A blue 59 Chevy rumbled alongside them, and the driver, the one called Randall Winfield, leaned on the horn. "Any of you hippies want a ride?" he drawled. Julia, Valerie, and Adrian declined, while Stu and Laura climbed in the backseat next to Louis. Winfield glanced at Julia. "Well, don't say I didn't offer to get you out of this heat." Pulling off his hat, he shook out his hair, revealing his face for the first time. Julia had to force herself not to gasp. He was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. His magnificent red-brown mane tumbled to his shoulders in a shining mass. He turned towards Julia, his chiseled features alight in a radiant smile usually found only in a very young child. His eyes, which matched his hair, sparkled with laughter, but hinted at greater depths. "Isn't this yours, Magnolia Blossom?" He handed Julia her $100 bill. "I encountered the good deputy as he tried to sneak out of the door while Louis was negotiating everyone's release. I reminded him we overheard your conversation, and that jogged his memory. He returns this to you with his sincere apologies and hopes there will be no hard feelings." "That's not the only thing of his that's hard," Adrian roared at his own joke. "Thank you," Julia could barely manage the words. Wynne is quiet but effective. Sitting next to him in the front seat, Sean leaned over his lap with a proprietary air. "You guys are coming to Stu and Laura's wedding tomorrow, aren't you?" "Oh, wow, I wouldn't miss that," Adrian said. "Sex and drugs and rock and roll." "Sure," Sean snorted in an unexpectedly genteel sound, right in front of the entire theater department on the step of the Performing Arts Center. She turned to Valerie. 3 o'clock. Wear your most far-out duds." "Of course they don't want me there," Julia thought with a stab of disappointment. "I don't even know them. Besides, I'm an outsider." "You're coming too."